Let's talk about methods. Methods, or they're sometimes also called functions, are a way of labeling a body of code so that you can reuse it later. So let's write out a method. I'll just make one up here called hello. So you'll see that first of all, there's a special syntax here for methods. You have to have this def because we're defining a method here, and then you can come up with whatever name you want, and then you need this end. So now anything that I write in between this definition of the method here and then this end is going to be the body of our method. So we can execute a lot of different pieces of code in here if we want. We could just do something simple like output to the console. We could even output multiple lines if we want. Now keep in mind, this is simply like a blueprint. What we're doing is we're laying this down into the code and we're saying, okay, we have this method here called hello, and it's going to do this and this. We could have it do mathematics, we could write complex algorithms in here, whatever we want. But keep in mind, when we execute this file, this practice.rb file, you'll see nothing will actually be output to the console, even though we're saying this method needs to output these two strings to the console. And the reason why, as you can see here, nothing gets output. The reason why is because this is simply just a blueprint, okay? So to actually execute a method, to get this to run, okay, and actually output this string or do whatever mathematics inside of it or whatever we want, we have to call it. That's the terminology we use. And all we mean by saying, okay, let's call a method is just let's run that actual method. Let's execute the code inside of it. So since we gave it our custom name here, it's very simple to call it. All you do is just write out its name. Kind of like a variable, right? So if you just put the variable's name there and output it to the console, you'll see what it stands for. So now when I run this, there you go. We are now outputting everything inside. So remember, methods can be complex. We can do a lot more inside a method, or you can keep them pretty simple like this. Now, one more thing about methods that make them special is that we can actually pass what we call parameters into a method. You'll sometimes hear that they're called arguments, okay? And so this is how we do that. We'll say, and we could give it a parameter of x, okay? So this is the syntax for adding a parameter to a method. You just write out the method name that you want to write, and then you have the parentheses, and you put however many parameters in there that you want. If you're going to use maybe 2, you could put 2, and you want to separate them with commas. So let's just keep it with 1 right now. So let's look at how we could actually use this parameter. We could output it in a string like this and say, I am X years old, right? So we could do it like that. And remember, we have to use string interpolation here. Okay, so let's explain what's going on here. By adding this parameter feature to this particular method that we're customizing here, this is going to allow us to use what we call, you could think of it like a temporary variable. I could name this whatever we want. In this case, we just called it X. And so now inside the body of this method, I can use this X however I want. You can think of it, again, like a temporary variable, and we could manipulate it however we want. We could do X plus 20, and things like that. So let's just take a look and see how this kind of works out. The way you can do that is you have to call the method, and then we need to pass a physical parameter in there. So we can put now any number or string or whatever we want. Let's go ahead and just put a number in there. Now when we execute it, you'll see it fits in seamlessly in the output here. So that's really nice. We can now put outside data inside of a method, and the way we do that is with parameters. And again, if I used 2 parameters like this, then we could pass in 2 things, like maybe 50 and a string, like name, a name, and then we could utilize that somewhere in this method body. We could say, hey, my name is something, and we'd want to use y if we were doing that, and so on. So that's how we use parameters. Now, keep in mind, just to illustrate how we could kind of manipulate something on the fly in a method, we could just go like this and say, let's create a new variable inside this method and assign it to what we pass in here. And then why don't we manipulate it? Why don't we add 20 to that? And then what we're going to do is just say, let's output this new variable we called age here. So when I run this now, and if I pass in something like 20, what do you think will happen? It's going to output 40 as the age, because what it's doing is we're saying, okay, we have this method and we're going to pass in anything. You know, we could pass in a number, we could even pass in an entire array or a hash or some other object. But what we're going to do is just pass in this variable here, x, and then we can do something with it. And in this case, we just added 20 to it and assigned that to a new variable that can be used inside this method. And then we're just going to output a string. Now, don't let this confuse you again. This is string interpolation. When we do this format here with the pound sign and then the curly braces, that's the only reason we're doing that is so that we can use a variable inside a string. So that's a little bit about methods.